Let me know, guys. Let me know. Thanks, Shred3 for the prime. I think I'll start with e4. You know, gotta start somewhere. Let's see what he plays, so then we can take some recommendations. But e4 is a solid start. All right, e4, e5. What are we thinking? Wow, so many suggestions. I'm going to start with knight f3. A lot of people suggesting the Vienna. We've actually played quite a few games in the Vienna, so in case you're looking for a game there, just wait for the episodes to drop on YouTube. Because we have, not like we won't play it again, but against this rating range, we've definitely had a few Vienna games. So I'll start with knight f3. Knight f6. Now, I have to say, at 850 ELO, when I see knight f6, I get a little bit nervous because I have a feeling that if I take this pawn, they're going to take this pawn. That's usually what happens. I'm waiting to be pleasantly surprised, but for the most part, when this happens, and I take that pawn, they take my pawn. There are other moves you could play here, but like, they just don't make sense. You should always take on e5 when you're faced with this opening, so I'll go ahead and do it. Knight takes e5. There's 3 different people that could be across the board from me right now. There's this guy, there's this guy, and there's this guy. Who's it gonna be? Many options. An important decision, a very important move. All right, we know exactly who we're dealing with here. Knight c6. How many moves of the Stafford theory do we think he's learned? Is this the extent of it? Does he know a couple more moves? Does he know 20 moves deep in theory? We're about to find out. I mean, many options here, but of course, we have to enter the dragon. Knight takes c6. Pawn takes, okay. This guy gets a check mark so far. Everything good. d3. To me, if I'm facing the Stafford, I got a hanging pawn in the center. d3 looks more than okay. Defending my pawn, I'm happy. So I don't have a particular line set out about how I handle the Stafford, but when people play it against me, I just feel like d3 is the simplest. One piece of advice that I've really always stuck by is if someone's playing a gambit or some weird variation or line you've never seen before, always start by playing the moves that look the most natural, because you will learn a lot about the opening or you will crush the opening. Or both. Let's say you play all the natural moves and you fall for like an amazing trap and it's like you're the sucker that the line is made for. You're going to learn a lot about that line. It's going to be pretty valuable information and you can immediately adjust going forward. So I think asking your opponent to prove it is always a good way to play. Bishop c5. This guy gets another check mark. We're on move 5, and every move is correct so far. Now, when I say every move is correct, I mean that white is much better. That's the Stafford for you. All right. Bishop c5. to me, I see, black has some very obvious intentions, some threats here, some I don't know what's. Bishop e3 has always made sense. I don't know if it's the best move, but to me it looks like the most obvious move. Kill this bishop's diagonal. I'm up a pawn, so why would I not want to trade? I know I get double pawns, but it's also double pawns in the center. That looks like a pretty nice pawn mass. I'm liking it. So again, I don't know too much theory here, but bishop e3 just makes sense to me. Let's guard the pawn with d3. Let's go for trades. Every time we trade a piece in this opening, I'm just under the impression that should favor me. So let's see how he handles this one. Because the bishop is challenged, it doesn't really make sense to me for the guy to go here or here or here. Like that, those moves seem like they waste time, because why wouldn't you have gone to those squares in the first place? You're just giving me an extra move. If you go back, then it's like, is it really worth me taking on b6 versus you taking on e3? I don't really know that it is. Right? My pawn structure staying intact seems better than if I had to go there. So this is definitely a move that I'm happy to play because it trades. But obviously, if I could have it my way, I'd take the bishop and leave my pawns completely fine and intact like that. His other option, I guess, is maybe to play queen e7. I could see that. But again, trading on my terms, and what am I going to do after that? I don't know. Probably like some very basic developing moves. I also don't have to take it. Could just develop anyway. So he makes a move that I would say is very good and very straightforward. Another check mark for this guy. We're on move 7 now. And again, he's done a tremendous job at securing a slightly worse position here as black. You'll be able to tell that someone has played the Stafford correctly because you'll be winning. Let's see if he can get the next move. I believe knight g4 is what the kids are doing, right? This is what everybody's up to. The Stafford is definitely one of those openings that if you don't play all the moves right, you'll very quickly be worse. Because you've handed your opponent a pawn. So obviously the onus is on you to play quite accurately. Don't I play the England Gambit? No, I definitely do not. I might have tried it less than 5 times in my career for the chat, but no, I definitely don't play the Stafford. Okay, he's castled, and I guess we could argue that castling may not be the move. I think knight g4 is the one you're supposed to do, but okay, I mean it's not like this is a terrible move or anything. However, I'm probably just gonna play a very, very straightforward move, knight c3. It's also an option for me to play bishop e2 to stop knight g4. So I'm choosing between those two moves here, in my opinion. Bishop e2 seems more preventative. I mean, knight g4 is playable, but bishop takes, queen h4, g3 will forcefully trade the queens, so absolutely worth it for me. Knight c3 looks like a great move, but if he is allowed to play these knight moves and get the queen out, I think his position probably improves a little bit. So yeah, I'm definitely thinking that bishop e2 makes it a bit more sense, just to cover that. But I think if knight c3 happened, that would be fine as well. Let's keep it really simple and play bishop here. Why am I not playing h3? I mean, it's a fair question. First of all, I don't like that queen h4 is now a check that I don't have an answer to. I can't block it safely. And then next, both of these moves stop knight g4. Why would I choose the move that moves a pawn instead of a piece? It's probably the best argument for bishop e2. Best one that I have. Covering this, my next couple moves are still going to be knight c3, maybe castle, queen d2. But I don't necessarily need to rush into castling because I could go knight c3, queen d2, and long castle, and that looks just fine. I have to think about what my position would look like. If I didn't move that bishop and play h3, it would be move 8. Move 8 in the chess game. And I wouldn't have a single piece developed. And that just doesn't feel right. It just does not feel right. Okay, so knight d7. He didn't have access to these squares. So he goes back. And I still think that he's played a decent move because at least he can get his queen out, which I think is really important in the Stafford. And he's also made a backwards knight move. So I'm going to go ahead and say maybe the last move I don't give him a check mark for in terms of the Stafford, castling early instead of knight g4. But I can't fault a 850 for castling. I think it's still objectively a good move. But this one, I think, definitely gets a check mark. He doesn't really have other options, and I like this move way better than like bishop e6 or something. Even though it's not developing another piece, I think he made the right decision. Okay. Do we castle kingside or instead of kingside castling, do we try to make queenside happen? You know, knight c3 right now, I'm immediately looking at queen g5, which is a double attack. And it's like, do I want to play king f2? It's not my favorite. I can say that truthfully. So bishop f3 comes to mind, queen d2 comes to mind, or just castling, because that then at least after queen g5, the pawn would be defended. So those are the moves that I'm thinking of. And obviously we want to get developed here and all that jazz. So if we castle, queen g5, pawns attacked, can kind of, you know, we could play queen d2, for example. Then I assume black would play knight e5. And I guess we could just move our knight out, like knight c3. I'm just wondering if black's threatening anything when all these pieces get out there. There's going to be a bishop h3. It's not really the end of the world. I can play rook f2. That's about it. That's kind of the scariest type of move that I could face, I think. But bishop h3 always seems to have rook f2 as an answer. So maybe playable. What's the other option than castling kingside? I think it's trying to go the other direction. So it would be a move like queen d2, queen g5, and then maybe bishop f3 and knight c3, right? And just try to castle completely in the other direction. So that's the other option. Which one do I like? I think castling queenside I might like more, but I think castling kingside just has this really like kind of obvious feeling like you're you're doing a move that just makes sense. So I'm gonna castle kingside. I think it's a decision where castling queenside is safer because it doesn't you don't have to deal with, threats later on. But also, castling kingside is such a standard way to play. I'm not trying to choose a very complicated solution right now, so let's keep it on the simple side. Castle. Not a bad move. C5, really not a bad move. The only reason I might say, like, don't know how I feel about it is because I think queen g5 was just a very good move. So, yeah, it's not that I don't like c5, but I think queen g5 was significantly better. So, knight c3 still looks like a reasonable move. If queen here, queen d2, knight e5, we can still get the pieces out. Now we even have a knight d5 move, which I kind of like. But is there a better way for me to handle queen to g5 now that I have the option, maybe? Because I'll tell you, the first thing that comes to mind and looks good now is bishop g4. Now I feel like if I trade for that, good. If I even trade for the bishop, also good. And then I defend my pawn. So something like bishop here, queen g5, queen e2, guard my pawn, and my next move, I'm either going to take the knight or take the bishop if you move the knight. No matter what, I trade pieces, and then my next move will be developing. So I really like bishop g4 now that I have time to play it and I'm castled. So I'm a big fan of this move. Still wondering if we'll see queen g5, but I think queen e2 is a fine answer. Queen e2, and if knight e5, we'll trade. And if black makes a move that doesn't hit my pawn, I have the option. I can take the knight, or I can just wait here and take the bishop whenever the knight moves. The knight, I'm actually not sure where it wants to go. Knight c3, black plays c6, and I don't really have a next square. But c3 itself is a good square for the knight. Whereas knight d2, if there's a knight on e5, it could help later to just trade it off and get it out of there. So it will kind of depend how my opponent develops or plays as to where I put my knight. Okay, so knight here, let's not waste time and play the move we were planning to play if this happened. So takes, another good move by the opponent, keeping the queen on this diagonal. And now I think we have a very pleasant option, knight d2 or knight c3. My instinct is really knight e2, because, sorry, knight d2, because I want to play knight f3 and basically get the knight off my screen. So I think I'm going to do that. I also like that it controls c4. So knight d2 and queen g5 still. I'm going with queen e2. This knight move also connects my rooks. So once I move my queen, I can bring my rook over. Queen h5. No, I don't like this instinct. Queen h5. It's a little too much for me. Make your lives simple. Develop pieces is like a basic principle. Connect the rooks. Queen e2. And, if queen g5, queen e2, I have a rook f5 move coming up. But I want to keep my plan simple. Knight f3. Get rid of the knight. So we'll see what he does here. Queen g5 still makes sense. He may choose to play a move like queen d6. A bit more standard. I'll probably proceed with queen e2. But it's interesting, this opening. At the end of the day, this 850 is playing a he is playing a good game. He's just started the game down a pawn, and so just kind of has to live with that the whole game. But he is playing a good game. It's just he's really handicapped himself, and so he's just been worse the whole time. Queen e2. This is the Stafford, yeah. So Queen e2, just guarding stuff, you know, eyeballing the c4 square, still taking into account knight to g4. I think knight d2 was an important move. The decision to play these two knight moves, I think most people would play knight there. I much prefer this because knight c3, c6, and I'm starting to dislike the knight's options. And I'm also not in a rush to play d4. Later on in this game, I can mobilize these pawns, but for now, just treat it like an investment. I have an extra pawn, so just let it exist. You don't need to go crazy and start mobilizing it right away. We're good. All right, rook e6. Another move that I want to give my opponent some credit for. I like the move. I think it's good. There's another caretaking move here, which I'm going to use that word. b3, which I kind of like. Stop c4 in general. I want to play knight f3, but I was thinking of, you know, maybe knight takes f3 and he tries to get c4 in. So that's something on my mind. I don't think it's necessary to play, but that's a move I'm thinking of. Another way to go is just rook f5 with rook f1. So I think I'm between this move, and just rook f5. Now rook f5 allows g6, which doesn't look great. But then maybe we can slide the rook back and double anyway. And now that we have g6, it could be a little uncomfortable actually for black. Because if I double the rooks, later on black might play f6, right? But if the pawn's on g6, that pawn will be a lot weaker. So I actually really like the move rook f5 here. Knight f3 takes, if rook takes, I wasn't a fan of c4. d4 drops the e-pawn. And although I take the c-pawn, that's not a trade I want to make. So I'm actually going to play rook f5. My next move, rook f1. I'm actually happy to see this move, as weird as that sounds. Then I just retreat the rook. And his rook is restricted from going to maybe h6. The knight doesn't have that square, neither the rook anymore. And as I just said, this pawn is more of a target with the pawn there, because now there's no safe square for it. You can't go to f5, and you certainly can't go, well, you can go to f6, but you certainly don't have the same support with that pawn on g6 anymore. So g6 rook back, and I still want to double. The reason why I'm saying doubling is so impressive here is because I know I can get rid of this knight with knight here later. So this is not a permanent solution to defending that pawn. It's there right now, and it's good, but I will be able to remove that knight. And at some point, I will play the move h3. It's a great move to stop knight g4 and give my king some space. So h3 is an all-star move, but I just don't think I need to spend time doing it just right now. Maybe once my queen wants to move to like a different square, then I might need h3, but for now this square is covered, so. Okay. He's been playing some good moves. I feel like this type of move might interest him, one of these. Like, it is about time, I would say, that he moved his queen. Unless he's thinking about pawn moves here. Or maybe he could really be trying to full send over there. Okay, queen d6. I mean, another good-looking move in my opinion. Very hard not to just play rook. Not to just play rook f1 here. But I will say that this is approaching that moment where I do want to get this move in. Everything I just said about this g6 thing is the same, but going over here, something just seems annoying about queen a6. Not sure if I can put my finger on it, but I want my pawns to look like that instead of like that. So I think I'm going to play, b3. a4 and b3 is exactly how I want things to look. Then everything's protected. Everything is covered. I don't have to worry about it. So I am kind of liking b3. And I don't see any way that... I don't think he's threatening anything new with that. So let's go here. We want to play rook over to f1. Now I don't need to play a4. I can just play rook f1 because queen a6 now gets met by a4. And if he plays b5, I can also play a4 myself and still look to trade off this knight. These are the moves that are always tough to explain, but it's just nice not to deal with, you know, knight takes, rook takes, pawn to c4. And then if I take or push, he takes on e4. It's just quality of life. h3, b3, a4. These are quality of life moves. And you have to pick a good moment to throw them in. Again, really can't fault my opponent for pretty much any of his moves thus far. I think he's been playing really well. But the opening that he chose just permanently set him behind for the rest of the game. Like, he's making me wonder if he played an opening that didn't set him behind a full pawn on literally the third move of the game, would he just be higher rated? Him doubling the rooks makes a lot of sense. But even some sort of queenside pawn move also does. He goes for rook h6. Obviously with some pressure on h2, I think it won't take a lot of convincing for you guys to get on board with the idea that h3, this quality of life move that I've been saying I want to play, but you need to find a good moment. Well, this is an obvious good moment because you deal with his threat and you make a move that we were planning to play anyway. So h3 is just an automatic move here. It's a move that was on our mind to play, and now it just makes sense, right? So my opponent has, I think, maybe just like sort of had his first move I would consider like a mistake of some sort. Now I'm wondering about this because he's now got that rook on the outside of the g-pawn. Like, now it can't really come back to the center. So a little bit weird there, I would say. So rook f4 or rook f2 are basically the only two moves I'm thinking. I don't think I would ever consider rook f1 unless there was a big problem with these moves because I want to still be able to double. So rook f4. I mean, the only reason why you would never choose a move like that is if this works. g5, rook f5, g4, but that seems quite speculative. So unless that's kind of concerning, I don't think g5 is, or I don't think rook f4 has a problem. But you could also make the call that why would you even allow g5, g4, right? When rook f2 does everything rook f4 does. Arguably, rook f4 is a better square, but rook f2 does all the same things, except just doesn't allow it. So, may as well. We want to double. Knight f3 or knight c4 to get rid of that knight. And black's position is going to start being really bad if that knight trades for my knight and I double the rooks, and then it's like, what's that rook doing? That rook is a real problem in the event that things just simplify. So this is a really feel-good move if we can play it next. Yeah, and the reason this is so nice is then you start to get in the territory of as soon as that knight leaves that square, you actually have a threat now. So big fan of rook f1, and doubling the rooks will almost always be a very good idea. So let's just play it quickly. Now I'm in the territory where I'm looking at these moves. Of course, rook f6 is a lot more tempting now, and maybe getting the queen to triple up. That rook feels to me like it's just out of play. So I think if things just go normally now, and we are able to get trades in, the rook on h6 might be the big difference in this game. Okay, g5. So I would say good thing, right? That our rook's not on f4. This is just counterplay that we didn't need to allow, didn't need to deal with, and now we don't have to. Our rook saves some time. That's why we put it on f2. So this move means my number one goal now is to trade the knight. I have to trade this knight. Once I do that, if these knights disappeared from the board, his game would be almost dead because g4 is not happening. There's a huge weakness on f5. f7 will be hanging. So anyways, long story short, getting rid of that knight is a priority right now. Knight c4 forces it off, whereas knight f3 doesn't quite force it. Technically, after this, I might have to calculate this, although it looks okay. Knight takes, doesn't look like anything. And if the knight moves somewhere, then I think we take on g5. So it feels like we can do it, but I'm gonna offer a piece of advice here. Knight f3, knight g6, and it's like, okay, take on g5. Let's say queen g3 happens. It's good for me, but my knight's hit. There might be something on h3. Knight takes f7, rook takes h3, queen h2 mate incoming. The best feeling that I could have here in my position is trading his knight. So 1000% I'm drawn to knight c4, even though that structure, you could argue, is not as good as the structure where I just play here and he trades. But now he doesn't have an option to keep the knights on the board. And I know that my position will be nearly insurmountable once these knights trade. So I don't want to even deal with the possibility. Knight c4 over knight f3 is a big preference of mine because now we ensure that the knights are being traded. And my position will start to get overwhelming now that the knight's gone. The knight has been the glue in his position, controlling squares, blockading this pawn, guarding f7. Once the knight's gone, the position actually gets much, much worse. If he takes, we'll take this way. There's no way we want to take here. And, well, our opponent was actually facing the first real pressure, first threat that he's really faced in this game. If he took, then we would take here. And obviously f6 is a massive blunder. Queen hangs. And understandably, the position crashes through. And knight c4 was definitely the right decision to force the knights off the board rather than knight f3. So I'm very happy with that. Just a more practical choice. And now, obviously, it's very tough to come back from. You can keep things real simple. Just trade that. Something's fallen here. I think at this point, the easiest thing would be for me to just push this pawn. I'm probably going to do that. Queen g6 cuts the king off. The knight's tied to that pawn. Basically, I don't see any reason why that doesn't work. So I'm going to make one move first, which stops knight e5. Not that it's really a threat because I take with check, but good practice to dominate all the knight's possible outlet squares. And now we'll just go here. It's a really good game by my opponent, but one massive blunder. Obviously, leaving the queen hanging there was a huge, huge mistake. But other than that, it's possible that almost every move was within the top 3 options. Could go grab it, but I think this is simple enough. Let's go. I mean, I guess we take this. I'm going to go more principled. Not even going to allow the knight to go to d6. We'll play e5. Now, the knight really doesn't have anywhere to go. If queen f6 check, h6 coming. This pawn should make a queen. Check. King here, pawn to e6 will lead to a much quicker mate. And you know, there's not much to do at this point. Maybe run in the corner. Maybe run this way. But yeah, I'm up too much material, right? Queen for knight. And it's always important in these positions to take stock, but he does have pawn moves. So I don't have to worry about stalemate. But you do want to obviously triple check that just because the king can't move. But in this position, we can play e7 and we can play e8 for a bit of a ladder checkmate. Here we go. GG. And we also hit 800 with that. Go us. Thank you, Dill. It's, you weren't going to deliver this if I wasn't going to win the game, right?
Sure.
That's how it works around here. Nobody eats or drinks until they win a chess game against an 800.
I'd be hungry for a while.
You'd be starving, huh? Dill heard that. He's like, wait, really? I didn't get the patch notes. He say, shit. Oof. That's not good. Not a good look for me. All right, that was the Stafford. It was a very good game by the opponent, you have to say. But again, the Stafford didn't have a big sting to it. But it did give him a playable position down a pawn. And probably players at his rating fall for traps in the Stafford a lot more than myself, obviously. So I'm sure he'll get a very high accuracy score. Let's see here. Yeah, 81%. Good stuff, right? Good stuff. Okay, so let's see here. All right, bishop c5, bishop e3, inaccurate. This is inaccurate. Now you're only better instead of winning. Interesting, because I just think bishop e3 takes the sting out of the Stafford. I haven't really seen a like you know how you've seen those Stafford games where people are like sacking here or like sacking here, bishop, just like the craziest stuff. That doesn't happen to people who play bishop e3. So this is some nice old man chess, you know, some Slowbrah chess. I'm a big fan of bishop e3 because it looks like a risk-free attempt to play the game. All right, we go bishop e2. Knight d7 I liked. Castle. And now it's just like white has a stable advantage almost the whole game. I was a big fan of bishop g4. Even if there were other moves that were comparable, I think bishop g4 is the best because it immediately puts a question to black's pieces, how they want to develop. Knight d2, I'm actually a fan of this move. I think queen e2 could have been played to maybe decide later with the knight. But I like knight d2 compared to knight c3. Knight c3, the thing that I don't like about it is that I know that at some point black's going to play c6. And yes, the plan might be to play d4, but it's a lot easier to navigate the position, in my opinion, if you keep this structure solid and don't move it, because then suddenly your pawns are weak and easy to attack. I mean, I wouldn't say they're weak, but they definitely become targets. Whereas here, there's no target. That's completely solid. It's a rock. So I like knight d2 in that sense, but it's fair to say that this slow approach, Slowbrah, is never going to be the engine's favorite. Okay, rook f5. b3 I like. I mean, of course, rook f1 is always a good move, but b3 is a bit of a caretaking move. h3 we like. And then here, rook f4, although a great move, I think we made the right decision with rook to f2. You know, I had a feeling he was a g5 kind of player. And here, knight f3 and knight c4 are both, you know, tremendous moves. But I really have a preference for knight c4 because it forces the knights off. And obviously, he didn't handle it very well. You know, he blunders this, but it's actually crazy to me that in this position, the eval is, you know, +3. And in this position, the eval is not even +6. Like, what? How the heck? How the heck? As I'm baffled by that. So f6 is only classified as a mistake. Even though it essentially, to me, loses the game on the spot. Like this position, only +6. Rook f8 is excellent. Like this seems favorable. How is this only +5? I'll never understand. This should be plus like 20 or something. Like, what? +5? This is crazy. I'm gonna get a queen? Like... I mean, it's unbelievable this isn't more than like +6. It's like finally after h5 they realize and they're like, oh wait, my bad, it's +35. Like, come on, keep up here. You're telling me it's +6 here? And plus what after h4? 35? Queen takes f7 is a top 3 move. I mean, you're kidding me. Finally. Finally. Look at this. Look at this junk. e5. Best move in the position with mate in 10. Best move. Is the engine broken? I play the best move and it's like, no, it's good. It's all right. I mean, it sucks, honestly. Queen takes f7 is best? On crack or something? What am I missing here? What's going on? Queen f7, absolutely not even close to the best move. Huh? Queen takes f7 is best, +7. e5 is good, +6. Meanwhile, the actual engine, made in 9. Huh? I'm baffled here. Wow. A4 going from mate in 9 to mate in 8. Mate in 7 is a mistake. Oh my god. What a blunder. Weird analysis, I gotta say. Very weird. It was a slow game. Meandering, methodical. I really do think the opponent played well. But it's also fair to say that he set himself up for failure just out of the opening, because I'd like to see what this guy could do in a regular position where he's not down a pawn. He seemed like a good player. Did not make many mistakes, and his biggest mistake was losing his whole queen. He probably just like had a moment of blindness. But the Stafford, look, I could even be saying stuff right now that's maybe not good advice when you think about the actual Stafford theory. But to me, I'm not viewing the Stafford as like super dangerous in a position like this. Like, I'd be curious to see how it's handled. Like, there are many ways to play it for white that probably maintain more of an advantage, but bishop e3 just seems so simple. Just kind of stay up a pawn. Obviously, black can play better moves. I think knight g4 might be the best, but I see white holding an advantage in all these lines pretty comfortably. So that's how I would handle the Stafford. Also, when you're first starting out and people are coming at you with the Stafford, you can guarantee that they are playing the Stafford because they have seen an Eric Rosen video and they've seen all the tricks and traps and sacrifices and all the cool stuff, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get that in the game. And then they get to the game and you're just like, yeah, do you want to trade pieces? You're down a pawn. Have fun.